opposition parties, BOSA, Mzansi, and the Good Party, they've all come together to form a new political movement called Unite for Change. Both Good and Mzansi are part of the Government of National Unity that was formed after last year's national elections, after no party secured an outright majority. BOSA leader Mzansi Maimane says the merged parties will be contesting the 2026 local government elections under a single marquee. Let's talk about it and what is likely to emerge from this merger. Joining me is political analyst Dr. Ongama Mtimka. Ongama, good morning. Thanks for waking up early and appreciate your time. One of the immediate references that kind of spring to mind is UFC, which is the ultimate fighting championship. This is mixed martial arts. And I mean, you know, you've got to have fitness and wit and strategy, but it is a bust-up. It's a dust-up. What do you make of these three entities coming together, also given their politics and their prospects for success?
Yeah, no, it's a good analogy, Iman. So if we look at South Africa's political system, it's been in transition. I would say it gained momentum, this transition process in 2016, and culminated in something I've called dynamic fragmentation, in the sense that the big parties were losing significant shares of electoral support. The big party, the ANC, DA, not growing significantly out of the that bracket between 19 and 22%. And but what I was referring to particularly with that concept of a dynamic fragmentation was the tendency of small parties to continue to be a permanent feature of our political system, even if particular political small parties come and go, in line with the theory of short-lived parties, because in other political systems, small parties are used interchangeably with short-lived parties. And I'm saying that this strategy by these leaders is a strategy that is both a survival strategy and a consolidation strategy in terms of boosting electoral performance among them. Because elections are very expensive, it's not uncommon for parties that are, you know, below that 5% threshold to not, in fact, in the case of COPE, even some that start at 8%, to fail to sustain electoral performance over time. It's expensive, resources are significant, and boots on the ground are not everywhere. So them consolidating does simplify the centrist voters' choices, and also it does give them some good fighting chance when it comes to local government elections next year.
All right, so that is interesting because, and I also found it interesting that you put COPE in there, because we know that one of the most effective corrosive agents in COPE and its prospects for success was an issue around the battle for the top position and the leadership position there. We know that the UFC Leadership Council, but you're dealing with very strong personalities. You've got Songezo Zibi, you've got Patricia de Lille, and you've got Mzansi Maimane, and we know that, you know, one of the reasons he went on his own was what was happening inside the DA from his perspective and where his voice was in that configuration. So how do you see that working out? Who ultimately is the leader of the Unite for Change?
What I appreciate about these leaders is their recognition that this task is an important one of them launching, deciding to work together, but is going to be difficult to continue to sustain. So I think that's a good thing. Also, if you look at who's been brought around the table, you've got people who are familiar with deal making as far as business is concerned, but you've got somebody who is in a significant stage in her political life in terms of, you know, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, you know, having been a minister. And these two leaders have been significant in parliament. But in comparative terms, I'm hoping that they will be able to overcome the challenges that come, with selecting among themselves who becomes the leader. Now, the good thing about a local government election is that that question doesn't correlate with who is the potential presidential candidate at the level of the state. So it does make things a little easy for them. And also that in this interim period, their commitment to existing in parliament as a party kind of defers the stakes that would be there if this was a national election. So all they have to focus on at the moment is the role that the individual parties continue to play in parliament and in the GNU, while also having to deal with the question of the leadership of Unite for Change. But the most significant part of that political debate is about finding mayors for municipalities and fielding people to municipalities. It kind of lessens the stakes as far as huge contestations for leadership. But you're right, Iman, that it becomes an issue. It becomes an issue, especially for the younger two leaders in that party. And they, to me, in fact, I don't even want to enter the game of speculation in terms of how they are going to handle the process of leadership there.
And it's going to be interesting. As you say, this is a different fight when you go into local government elections. There's a different strategy going in. So we'll see whether there is some maturity over the next 2 to 3 years leading up to the next national election. Let's go back to the GNU. So 2 of the 3 sort of merging parties, this is Good and Rise Mzansi, are part of the GNU. So I'd like your thoughts on how this new political configuration might impact, on the internal balance and cohesion of the GNU. Okay, let's start there, because I also want to talk to you about the differing politics amongst these parties and how they begin to define a single hymn sheet.
Yeah, so I'd like to borrow from systems theory there. And Arthur Koestler advances this point of a holon in systems, that holons have got an interesting dynamic. On one level, they integrate with the bigger whole in order to function collaboratively. But on another, they assert their autonomy in order to continue to survive or pursue whatever self-determined objectives. Now, this one, the question is an interesting one in terms, because the response or what happens in the GNU is not just a function of these autonomous actors, but also the response of the ANC. When it comes to the autonomous actors themselves, I'm thinking that they are going to continue. There's no need for them to agitate to be outside of the GNU as things stand, especially because the GNU as a constructed system doesn't really, lend itself to the kind of overbearing politics that we have seen in local government coalitions, where the big parties dominate significantly and there's completely no voice for the smaller ones, or the smaller ones have got a disproportionate power and sway over the politics of the broader ones. When it comes to the ANC, the Democratic Alliance and others, and how they respond to this, my view is that if there's a significant maturity across the entire system, it should be okay, because the ANC and the DA go at each other at the local level while attempting to collaborate at a national level. This is the reality of where we live. So if they can accord to each other that privilege, or it should also be accorded to, or in fact that right, it should also be accorded to the smaller parties.
I mean, as you say, you invoked the concept, the notion of systems theory, and effectively the interconnected nature of things. But you also started our conversation talking about dynamic fragmentism or fragmentation. Yeah. Let's go then to the identities of these 3 parties and their constituencies, most importantly. I mean, because isn't it interesting, whenever we have these conversations about political decisions, either in the identity or the future of parties, we leave the people who, elected the people to these positions out of those conversations, and it becomes a very leadership-centered conversation. However, their constituencies, Good, Rise Mzansi and BOSA, how do you see them all gelling, Could this be the start of a credible consolidation of centrist, reform-minded politics in what you've already shared with us is a fragmented political opposition politics landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was saying this simplifies centrist voter choices. Because remember, while the ANC and the DA are on that continuum from center left to center right, the other aspects of their identity, such as, for example, a product of African nationalism, another the source of the need for African nationalism in the first place, but in the democratic period, a responder to African nationalist views. Okay, they kind of do not make the DA and the ANC just political parties who should be judged on their ideological, offering. Whereas these parties, because they are new, their leaders have mainly, found their political voices and activism in the democratic period, and have been consistent in terms of advancing centrist ideas. Obviously, we know Suspect's own trajectory from radical left politics to center-left politics, or centrist politics completely. I think for me, it's simplifying, it's a consolidation, and the voters of these two parties have themselves very often on social media. In fact, even the critics of these parties, especially BOSA and Rice, said, "Why don't you guys match?" So this is a logical step. What I appreciate about what the leaders are doing is the professional humility to permit what is a logical political strategy to be done. Whether it succeeds significantly is a function of what's going to happen to for example, the wannabe radical leftist bloc in South Africa. If you look at that bloc currently, it's in crisis. Whether that's Mkhonto weSizwe Party or the EFF less internal leadership, but potentially facing this crisis around Julius Malema's fate. The center, sort of closer to the center of that leftist bloc, the ANC, has been facing a decline that seems to be intractably downward, in terms of it's sort of a trend that's intractably downwards. The DA, again, it's not a natural or an easy shift ANC to them because of some reservations about and lack of trust among the major constituents in South Africa about whether they truly, embrace politics of social justice, which is what the leaders were emphasizing yesterday. So it's an interesting one.
I mean, it's a fascinating observation into political maturation in South Africa, these developments, Ongama. So that's, I guess, on the one side, something good to watch. We are at a portion of our program called The Middle Ground, and I think what you're alluding to is, as these parties kind of lay the foundation in middle ground politics, might that be more palatable to voters come the next election? And I'm not talking about the local government elections in 26, but kind of leapfrogging forward to 29 for our national elections. And of course, they've got time to grow and really find their own rhythm between those two elections.
Yeah, it's an interesting solution, both in terms of the national question around citizenship, but also in terms of politics, but also a counter to populist politics. So people have got an option, and that's why while we may, have cite all the challenges of a proportional representation system, this one of allowing the political system to avail